The Wrong Crib, Chapter 1. My life for the first 6 decades felt like a well-worn path. It wasn't extraordinary, perhaps, but it was mine. I was Eleanor, a woman of 62, retired from teaching, a widow of 5 years, with 2 grown children and 3 lively grandchildren who were the absolute light of my life. I lived in the house where I grew up, filled with the familiar furniture, the scent of lemon polish, and the comforting ghosts of my parents, Margaret and Thomas Vance. They were good people, kind, hardworking, pillars of our small community. My childhood was happy, safe, grounded in the unwavering certainty of their love and the knowledge of who I was, their daughter. My mother, Margaret, passed away 10 years ago, and my father, Thomas, followed just last year. Sorting through their belongings has been a slow, emotional process, a way of staying connected to them, of sifting through the layers of their lives. The attic was a treasure trove of memories, old photo albums, forgotten letters, trunks filled with clothes from a bygone era. It was a journey back in time, a quiet communion with the past. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, I was going through my mother's desk, a beautiful antique piece that had sat in her study for as long as I could remember. It was meticulously organized, everything in its place. Folders of bills, tax records, family documents, birth certificates, marriage licenses, deeds to the house, the paper trail of a life neatly cataloged. As I reached the very back of a deep drawer, my fingers brushed against something hidden, tucked away beneath a stack of old photographs. It was a small, tied bundle of letters, not in their usual organized folders, but hidden, almost deliberately concealed. The paper was yellowed, brittle with age. The handwriting was not my mother's. Intrigued, and with a growing sense of unease, I untied the faded ribbon and began to read. The letters were dated from the spring of 1962, the year I was born. They were addressed to my mother, Margaret Vance, in a delicate, almost frantic hand, signed simply Eleanor. My dearest Margaret, I don't know how to write this. The guilt is consuming me. Every time I look at her, at the baby in my arms, my heart aches with the knowledge of what we have done. The nurses, they were complicit, Margaret, bribed, or perhaps just terrified. They knew, they saw. It felt like the only way at the time. For everyone, for her, for us. Your father was insistent, Margaret. The scandal. In 1962, an unmarried mother, it would have ruined me, ruined the family name. And the baby, what kind of life would she have had, a child of shame? But the other baby, the baby who should have been yours, my heart aches for her, for the life she will lead, so different from the one she was born into. Does her mother suspect? Does she see the difference? The eyes, they are so clearly yours, Margaret, so clearly Thomas's. We agreed, Margaret. We agreed this was for the best. A stable home for her, a chance at a normal life, a life without shame. But the cost feels unbearable. I visit the nursery window every day, pretending to be a distant relative, aching to hold the baby who should have been mine, the baby who is truly yours. Please, Margaret, tell me we did the right thing. Tell me she will be loved. Tell me the secret is safe. The baby in my arms. She is beautiful, but she is not mine. Not truly. The bracelets, the hospital bracelets, they were switched. In the confusion, in the darkness of that night. Forgive me, Margaret. Forgive us. Forgive me for what we have done. Forgive me for taking the baby who should have been yours. Forgive us for the lie. With a heart heavy with sorrow and regret. Eleanor. The letter slipped from my trembling fingers, fluttering onto the floor. My breath hitched, a gasp caught in my throat. The room swam around me. 1962, the year I was born. Hospital, 2 babies, switched bracelets. Taking the baby who should have been Margaret's. A secret, a lie. It couldn't be. What was Eleanor writing about? Who was Eleanor? And what did she mean by the baby who should have been yours? I scrambled to pick up the other letters in the bundle. They were from the same Eleanor, to my mother, filled with the same agonizing guilt, the same references to the switched babies, the same desperate need for reassurance that they had done the right thing, that the secret was safe. One letter mentioned a specific date, April 14th, 1962, my birthday, the day the babies were born. The world I had known, the solid ground I stood on for 62 years, crumbled beneath my feet. These letters, hidden away for decades, were hinting at an impossible, earth-shattering truth. I wasn't Margaret and Thomas Vance's daughter. I was someone else's baby, switched with their biological child in the hospital in 1962, for reasons shrouded in secrecy and shame. The baby Margaret Vance took home, the baby she raised as her daughter, as me, was not her own. And her biological child, the baby who should have been hers, had gone home with someone else, with Eleanor. My parents, the kind, loving, upright people who had raised me, had been part of a deception that had fundamentally altered the course of 2 lives, 2 families. They had raised a child who wasn't biologically theirs, while their own child was raised by another woman, a woman named Eleanor, who carried the agonizing burden of knowing she was raising the wrong baby. Who was Eleanor? A friend of my mother's? A relative? The letters didn't specify her relationship to my mother, only her desperate plea and shared secret. And who was I? If I wasn't Margaret and Thomas Vance's daughter, then who were my biological parents? And where was the baby who should have been theirs? The baby who was biologically theirs. The familiar furniture in the room, the photos on the walls, the scent of lemon polish. It all felt alien, disconnected from the reality that was unfolding before me. My entire life had been built on a lie woven by the people I loved and trusted most. Chapter 2. The initial shock gave way to a whirlwind of emotions: confusion, anger, betrayal, and a profound sense of disorientation. My identity, the very core of who I thought I was called into question. 62 years of believing I was Margaret and Thomas Vance's daughter, only to discover that my life began with a secret, a switch, a deliberate act that placed me in the wrong crib. The letters from Eleanor, my biological mother, were filled with her agonizing guilt, her love for the baby she couldn't keep, the baby she had entrusted to her sister. My mother, Margaret, must have been Eleanor's sister. And in a time when unmarried mothers faced immense shame and societal judgment, they had made a desperate, life-altering decision. Eleanor, unable to raise me herself due to the circumstances, had given me to her married sister, Margaret, who would raise me as her own, while Margaret's biological child went home with Eleanor, creating a convoluted, heartbreaking swap. My parents, Margaret and Thomas, had gone along with this deception. They had raised me as their daughter, loved me, provided for me, all while carrying the secret that I was not biologically theirs, and that their own child was being raised by another woman, their sister-in-law, Eleanor, who was also my biological mother. It was a web of intertwined relationships and hidden truths that felt almost too complex to comprehend. Who was my biological father? The letters mentioned, "Your father was insistent, Margaret," referring to Margaret's father, my maternal grandfather. Was he involved in orchestrating this deception? The letter hinted at the scandal being a driving force. And the baby who should have been theirs? The baby Margaret and Thomas had longed for, the baby Eleanor took home, the baby who was biologically Margaret and Thomas's child, but Eleanor's adopted daughter? Where was she now? Who was she? My biological sister? My adoptive parents' biological daughter? My biological mother's adopted daughter? The relationships twisted and turned, a painful tangle of biology, adoption, and deception. I felt a complex mix of emotions towards my parents, Margaret and Thomas. Love for the life they had given me, for the care and affection they had shown me, but also anger and a deep sense of betrayal for the monumental secret they had kept. How could they have built our family on a foundation of lies? How could they have allowed such a profound deception to shape all of our lives? And Eleanor, my biological mother, the woman who wrote those heartbreaking letters, she had made a choice born of desperation, likely under immense pressure. She had carried the guilt for decades. What had her life been like? Had she found happiness? Had she ever revealed the truth? And what about the baby she took home? The baby who was biologically Margaret and Thomas's child. Had she raised her as her own? Had she ever told her the truth? I knew I had to find out more. I had to uncover the full story, to understand the circumstances surrounding my birth and the life of the baby who should have been in my place. It wasn't about replacing the love I had for the parents who raised me. That love was real and enduring. But it was about understanding my origins, about connecting with the truth of my identity, and about finding the baby who was swapped with me, the baby who was biologically my adoptive parents' child, my biological mother's adopted child, and possibly my half-sister. Where do you even begin to look for a person who was swapped at birth over 60 years ago, when their very identity was built on a lie? I started with what I knew. The hospital where I was born, mentioned in the letters. The date of birth, April 14th, 1962. The names, Margaret Vance and Thomas Vance, my adoptive parents, and Eleanor, my biological mother, possibly Eleanor Vance, if she was Margaret's sister. I decided to focus on finding Eleanor first, my biological mother, the woman who wrote those letters, the woman who raised the baby, who should have been Margaret and Thomas's. If she was Margaret's sister, she might still be alive. I started searching for anyone named Eleanor Vance, who would be in her 80s now, born around the same time as my mother Margaret. I also searched for records related to the hospital in 1962, looking for births on April 14th, for any anomalies or unusual circumstances noted in the records, though I knew, given the nature of the secret, that any official records might be falsified. My search for Eleanor Vance proved difficult. It was a common name, and tracing someone after so many years, especially someone whose life might have been deliberately low profile due to a hidden secret, was a challenge. Then, a breakthrough. Not through official records, but through the letters themselves. In one of the later letters, Eleanor mentioned a specific town she was living in. A town not far from where we grew up. It was a fleeting reference, but it gave me a starting point. I focused my search on that town, looking for anyone named Eleanor Vance who had lived there since the 1960s. I found a record of an Eleanor Vance who owned a small cottage in that town, a cottage that had been in her family for generations. Property records showed she had passed away just a few years prior. She was gone. My biological mother, the woman who carried the secret, who wrote those heartbreaking letters, who raised the baby who should have been my adoptive parents. She was gone, and I had never had the chance to meet her, to understand the full story from her perspective, to hear her voice, not in a letter, but in person. Chapter 3. The discovery that my biological mother, Eleanor Vance, had passed away just a few years before I uncovered her secret, brought a wave of profound sadness. The chance to meet her, to hear her story, to connect with the woman who had given me life and then made an impossible choice, was lost forever. The letters she wrote, filled with guilt and longing, were the only tangible link I had to her, a silent testament to a life shaped by a devastating secret. But knowing her name, knowing where she had lived, allowed me to dig deeper. I searched for obituaries for Eleanor Vance in that town. I found one, a brief notice listing her passing, her age, and surprisingly, the names of surviving family members. She had a daughter, Sarah Vance, and grandchildren. Sarah Vance, her daughter, the baby she had taken home from the hospital in 1962, the baby who was biologically Margaret and Thomas Vance's child, my adoptive parents' daughter, my biological sister. Sarah Vance, my biological sister, the baby who should have been in the crib next to mine in the hospital nursery, who should have gone home with my adoptive parents, who had been raised by our biological mother, Eleanor. The tangled web of relationships tightened, bringing me closer to the truth, closer to the possibility of connecting with the life that was meant for me, the life that had been given to someone else. Finding Sarah Vance was the next step. Using the information from the obituary, I searched for her online. I found a listing for a Sarah Vance in her early 60s, living in the same town where her mother, Eleanor, had lived. She was a retired teacher, like me. The similarities, the connections, felt both remarkable and unsettling. Reaching out to Sarah felt daunting. How do you approach a woman you believe to be your biological sister, the woman who was swapped with you at birth, and reveal a truth that will shatter her understanding of her own life? I drafted a letter carefully, choosing my words with immense sensitivity. I introduced myself, explained about finding my adoptive mother's letters, the secret they revealed about a baby swap at the hospital in 1962, and the names involved, Margaret and Thomas Vance and Eleanor Vance. I explained my belief that I was the baby who went home with Eleanor, and that she was the baby who went home with Margaret and Thomas. I shared the information about our mothers being sisters. I emphasized that I wasn't looking to disrupt her life, only to share the truth that had come to light, to understand the full story, and if she was open to it, to connect with the woman who was biologically the daughter of the parents who raised me and the adopted daughter of my biological mother. It was a complex explanation, a delicate unveiling of a monumental secret. I included my phone number and email address. Sending the letter felt like sending a bomb through the mail. I knew it would have a profound impact on Sarah's life, just as the letters from Eleanor had impacted mine. The wait for a response was agonizing. Days turned into a week, filled with anxiety, anticipation, and the constant replay of the possible reactions Sarah might have. Would she believe me? Would she be angry? Would she want nothing to do with me? Then my phone rang, an unknown number. My heart pounded against my ribs. I took a deep breath and answered, "Hello? Is this Clara Vance?" The voice was female, tentative, but with a resonance that felt strangely familiar. "Sarah." "Yes," I said, my voice trembling. "This is Clara." "This is Sarah Vance," she said softly. I received your letter." Her voice was calm, but I could hear the shock and uncertainty beneath the surface. "Thank you for calling, Sarah," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I know that letter must have been a lot to take in." "A lot is an understatement," she said, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "Switched at birth? My mother? Your mother? Sisters?" "Yes," I confirmed. According to the letters I found, written by Eleanor Vance, my biological mother, addressed to Margaret Vance, my adoptive mother, they detail the circumstances, the hospital, the date, the swap. "My mother," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder. "She never spoke of this, never. She was always a quiet woman, carried a lot of sadness, I think. But this? And the parents who raised you," I continued, my voice gentle. "Margaret and Thomas Vance. According to the letters, you are their biological daughter. The baby who should have gone home with them. The baby my biological mother, Eleanor, took home and raised as her own." There was a long silence. I gave her space to process the earth-shattering news. The parents she had loved, the people she believed were her biological parents, were in fact her adoptive parents. And the woman she knew as her mother, Eleanor Vance, was her adoptive mother, but also her biological mother's sister. And the woman who had raised her, while carrying the secret that her biological parents were someone else. The layers of intertwined lives and hidden identities were immense. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice filled with a mix of sadness and profound revelation. "So the people who raised you, Margaret and Thomas Vance, they were my biological parents." "Yes," I said, tears streaming down my face. "They were. The parents who raised me, who I loved as my own, were your biological parents. And the woman who raised you, Eleanor Vance, was my biological mother. And we are biological sisters," Sarah said, her voice filled with wonder. "Yes," I whispered, "we are." Chapter 4. The initial conversation with Sarah was the beginning of a long and emotionally complex journey. We were two women, strangers, yet intimately connected by blood and a shared hidden history. Our lives, lived parallel for 62 years, built on a foundation of deception, were now colliding, bringing with them a flood of questions, emotions, and the daunting task of reconciling the past with the present. We talked for hours that first day, and in countless conversations that followed. We shared the fragmented pieces of our lives, the stories of the parents who raised us, the families we had built. Sarah shared her memories of her mother, Eleanor, the woman who had raised her with love, but also carried a palpable sadness, a quiet burden Sarah had never understood. She described Eleanor's love for her, a fierce, protective love that now, in light of the truth, took on a new, heartbreaking meaning. I shared my memories of my parents, Margaret and Thomas Vance, the people who had loved and raised me, the people who were, unknowingly to me for 6 decades, Sarah's biological parents. I spoke of their kindness, their strength, the values they had instilled in me, and I grappled with the knowledge that they had kept this monumental secret, a secret that had shaped all of our lives in ways we were only now beginning to comprehend. We decided to meet in person. It felt like a necessary step in this extraordinary journey of reconnection. We chose a neutral location, a quiet cafe halfway between our towns. As I waited for her, my heart pounded with a mixture of trepidation and anticipation. She arrived, and as she walked towards me, I saw a reflection of the parents who raised me. The curve of her smile, the depth of her eyes, a certain way she carried herself. It was like seeing glimpses of my beloved mother and father in a stranger's face. Meeting Sarah was surreal. We hugged, hesitantly at first, then with a growing sense of connection. We were strangers, yet our bond was undeniable, rooted in the complex tapestry of our shared past. We talked for hours, sharing our stories, our feelings, the shock and confusion of the revelation. We looked at old photographs, photos of my parents, Margaret and Thomas, photos of Sarah's mother, Eleanor. Seeing them side by side, knowing the truth, was a powerful experience. We talked about the reasons behind the swap. The letters hinted at the scandal of an unmarried mother in 1962, the pressure from my maternal grandfather, the desire to protect the family name and give me a stable life. It was a decision made in a different era, under different societal pressures, but its impact had rippled through decades, affecting generations. Sarah had to grapple with the fact that the parents she knew as her own were not her biological parents, and that the woman she knew as her mother was not her biological mother, but the woman who had selflessly, albeit secretly, raised her while carrying the weight of a profound lie. Her love for Eleanor Vance, the woman who raised her, was real and enduring, but it was now layered with the complex understanding of the secret she had carried. My love for Margaret and Thomas Vance, the parents who raised me, remained unwavering, but it was now seen through the prism of their deception. I understood, intellectually, the pressures they faced, the desire to protect their sister and provide a good life for me. But the emotional weight of the secret, the fact that they had built my life on a foundation of lies, was a difficult truth to reconcile. We talked about forgiveness. Forgiving our parents for the choices they made, for the secrets they kept, was a complex process. It wasn't about condoning their actions, but about understanding the circumstances, the societal norms of the time, and the difficult position they were in. It was a journey of acknowledging the pain caused by the deception and finding a path towards acceptance and peace, both for ourselves and for the memory of the people who raised us. Our connection as sisters deepened with each passing day. We were two halves of a whole, two lives that had been intertwined from the moment of our birth, separated by circumstance, but brought back together by fate and the power of a hidden truth. We shared a bond that was unique, forged in the crucible of this extraordinary family history. Chapter 5. The discovery of the baby swap, the revelation of our true parentage, and the reconnection with Sarah. My biological sister was a journey that transformed my life in ways I could never have imagined. The initial shock and confusion gave way to a complex process of emotional healing, of reconciling the past with the present, of redefining my identity, not by the names on a birth certificate, but by the love and connections that had shaped my life. My love for the parents who raised me, Margaret and Thomas Vance, remained the bedrock of my emotional world. The knowledge of their secret didn't diminish the love they had shown me, the values they had instilled, the life they had given me. It added a layer of complexity, a deeper understanding of their humanity, their flaws, and the difficult choices they made in a challenging era. Forgiveness in this context was about extending compassion to them, recognizing the pressures they faced, and finding peace with the fact that their actions, though born of deception, were likely motivated by a desire to protect and to love. Connecting with Sarah, my biological sister, was a profound gift. We were two women who had lived parallel lives, unknowingly linked by blood and a shared hidden history. We shared a bond that was unique, forged in the crucible of this extraordinary family saga. We talked about our biological mother, Eleanor Vance, the woman who had made an impossible choice, the woman who had loved us both in different ways and under different circumstances. We honored her memory, understanding the burden of guilt she had carried throughout her life. The story of the baby swap, the secret kept for 62 years, became a testament to the complex ways lives can be shaped by societal norms, by difficult choices, and by the enduring power of love and the search for truth. It was a reminder that the families we create are not always defined solely by biology, but by the bonds of love, care, and shared experience. Sarah and I continued to build our relationship as sisters, finding comfort and connection in our shared history and our newfound bond. We were living the future that our biological mother, Eleanor, had perhaps only dared to hope for. Her two daughters, connected, knowing the truth, navigating the complexities of their intertwined lives together. The hidden letters in my mother's desk, the small, tied bundle of paper that had sat concealed for decades, were no longer just a source of shock and pain. They were the keys that unlocked a hidden history, the catalyst for a journey that led to unexpected connections, to a deeper understanding of my own identity, and to a profound sense of peace that came with finally knowing the truth. My life, once defined by the clear lines of a traditional family structure, was now seen as a rich, complex tapestry woven with threads of biology, adoption, secrecy, and ultimately, love and connection. The wrong crib, the lie that began my life, had ultimately led me on a journey to find my truth, to connect with my biological sister, and to find a deeper understanding of the extraordinary, sometimes heartbreaking ways families are made and shaped by the choices made in the shadows of the past. The legacy of The Secret was not just one of deception, but one of resilience, of the enduring power of family bonds, and the possibility of finding healing and connection, even after 62 years of living a life that began with a secret swap.